I'm back. Time to take a look at an overview of World War II. Look at some of the key events, the key battles of World War II. Obviously, when you think about World War II, you kind of think of the Axis alliance, the Axis powers. Adolf Hitler, obviously, is the first person that usually comes to mind. He became chancellor in 1933. It's kind of interesting that he and Mussolini each came to power through appointments. So he was officially named chancellor in 1933. Much like Mussolini, he and Hitler had fascist or Nazi governments, respectively, in their countries with a totalitarian dictator rule. He demanded, shortly after getting into power, more living space for the German citizens. He wanted to unite all German-speaking people together. Lebensraum is the best I can do in terms of the German pronunciation. He officially annexed Austria in 1938 in order to add additional German-speaking people to his empire. Notice the propaganda with the Nazi flags and such flying down the streets here. After that, Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, if you remember that was negotiated out through the Munich Pact. Neville Chamberlain, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, negotiated that out and said Hitler's not a bad guy. He kind of trusted Hitler. Additionally, Hitler negotiated, you can see Stalin with the mustache, second from the right there. They agreed to share Poland eventually and not to fight each other. Of course, anytime that Hitler makes a promise, as we know, he's got one hand behind his back with his fingers crossed. Not necessarily the most trustworthy person. So the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact was signed in August of 1939. This is an agreement between Hitler and Stalin, Germany and the Soviet Union. Additionally, this was an idea to kind of keep the British out of the war at this point in time as well. And then the key thing they agreed to is to split Poland, with the eastern half of Poland going to the Soviet Union, the western half to Germany and Hitler. Nazi invasion of Poland took place in September 1939. German blitzkrieg, where they used an overwhelming force in an attempt to defeat and overwhelm the Polish military, which of course they did. So this is a quick German victory and probably the best illustration of the Blitz during World War II. This finally gets the British to stop their idea of appeasement. Also proved to Great Britain and the rest of the world that Neville Chamberlain had been wrong about Hitler, not somebody who should have been trusted. And shortly thereafter, Chamberlain is ousted as prime minister, and in comes Winston Churchill as the new leader of Great Britain. Now the French, they thought they had France pretty secure. They had been fortifying since World War I the Maginot Line. If you look at the Maginot Line here, it was a heavily defended area with the strongest of fortifications along the German border in the dark red. The dotted area, they had some fortifications there, much weaker. The French, not really being a good student of history, kind of assumed that the Germans would just come straight across the French and German border. Of course, they did not. They went through Belgium and swept through Belgium towards Paris. So there's a visual image of the Maginot Line. These are the massive defenses built along France's border with Germany after World War I. Here's a political cartoon, a little disturbing in nature. Hitler with the gun. You see Mussolini there as well. The two of them are forcing the French to sign an armistice, giving up control of their country. France was overrun quite quickly. By May of 1940, they were finished. Hitler's army moved through the Ardennes and along and around the Maginot Line, as I mentioned. So they basically went through the Ardennes forest in Belgium and into France. They reached France's north coast in 10 days, and France surrendered. The war itself could have come to a quick conclusion if not for the miracle at Dunkirk. In the spring of 1940, Allied forces were pushed to the beaches of Dunkirk and basically pressed up against the English Channel with no place to go. French and British troops were rescued by 850 British ships. The new Prime Minister of Great Britain, Winston Churchill, called on volunteers, anybody who owned a rowboat, a sailboat, a tugboat, whatever it might be, volunteered and were almost commandeered into the British Navy to help rescue the Allied soldiers along the Dunkirk beaches and prevent them from being captured or slaughtered by the Germans. So if you look here, the two French zones here that were under control of German occupation. You can also see some of the other movements here under Italian occupation. You see Italy kind of moving into southeastern France. Now, after defeating the French, the Germans had their eyes on Great Britain, which goes to the Battle of Britain in the summer of 1940 through May of 1941. The German Luftwaffe, which is their air force, made nightly bombing raids over Great Britain. New technology, the radar, allowed the British Royal Air Force to hold off Germany. And basically through attrition, the Germans eventually got tired of losing a plane every single night, or two or three, and pilots. It seemed as if the occupation and invasion of Great Britain would not come about for Germany, and Hitler eventually gave up. See a little boy there, obviously in the middle of rubble. People hiding out, young children in the trenches here from the German attacks above. There you can see one of the city streets left over there from the Battle of Britain. You can see a double-decker British bus that basically got sucked into the hole that was created by a German bomb. Here you can see a very famous quote from British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. After failing to take over Great Britain, Hitler makes a big decision. It ends up being a bad decision. He decides he's going to flip-flop swap and double-cross Stalin, not a guy you want to double-cross. Just ask his wife. When you look at Operation Barbarossa, this was Hitler's secret plan to take over the Soviet Union. June of 1941, Germany breaks the non-aggression pact and invades the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union used scorched earth policy, basically burning anything in their retreat so that the Germans would not have supplies. Eventually, Germany moves on to Moscow and to Stalingrad. If you look at Stalingrad here, basically the Russians are trying to hold back the onslaught of the Germans. You see here a lot of movement of people out of the harm's way there. You can see how cold and frigid it was. So this battle took place from August of 42 to February 1943. The Germans had hoped they would be able to get out of Stalingrad before the winter set in. German troops surrendered to the Soviet Union due to starvation and cold. Meanwhile, in late 1941, the United States still remained neutral. This, of course, until Pearl Harbor. December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy, the Japanese surprise attack in the United States. This is in retaliation to the oil embargo and the embargo of other goods being sold to the Japanese. 19 American ships are sunk or damaged. Some 2,300 Americans killed, and the United States, of course, enters World War II. There's Roosevelt giving his speech yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. Famous quote from Franklin Roosevelt. 1942 to 1945. Hitler had massive defenses built along Europe's western coast against invasion. You can see the green area there. That's where he built up the western coast wall there in Western Europe. You can see there that some of the guns, the high-range, high-powered guns the Germans had fortified here to defend. They knew that eventually the Allies would attempt to reclaim France. There you can see they have the high positioning too. So when you think about and envision the Allies coming ashore at Normandy Beach, that's the fortifications on the top of the hill that were waiting for them. Just look at the massive size of the barrel of that high-powered artillery. You can see the soldier standing next to it. Gives you kind of a indication of how large that was. Here's the Dover Cliffs. Those are in Great Britain. Here's a long-range gun again. D-Day, there's Dwight Eisenhower pictured there in the darker uniform, speaking and firing up the troops. This is the massive invasion of Europe planned by the Supreme Allied Commander, Dwight David Eisenhower. Normandy Beach, France is selected as the best location, not because it's the most narrow point, but it's this point in which they feel is least defended by the Germans in an area where they wouldn't expect the Allies to attack. You can see there Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword are the areas in which they're going to attack. You see 2 American flags, 2 Brit flags, and a Canadian flag. So there's 5 different groups that are invading on D-Day. It's the largest amphibious invasion in the history of the world. You can see the craft they're on, these kind of low amphibious crafts where the gate opens up and everybody kind of charges forward into the shallow water. The invasion is June 6, 1944, which is another date you should remember. Troops land in France. They push into Germany. As I mentioned, the largest land and sea attack in history, or amphibious attack. This leads to the eventual liberation of Belgium, France, and Luxembourg. There's another position of the craft coming towards the shore. Just imagine what's going on in their minds. Many of them are not much older than many of you, 18, 19 years of age, and they don't know what to expect. And if you look at that photograph there, I can almost guarantee you one or more of those soldiers did not survive the D-Day attack that's in that photograph there. Here you can see them wading through the shallow waters, and you can see the high hills behind the beach there that they're going to be firing down onto the soldiers who are coming ashore. Some soldiers got gunned down in those shallow waters, never actually made it to the beach. You can see there a bunch of soldiers on top of a tank that's coming ashore at this particular point in time. You can see a whole lot of ships and equipment all coming ashore. You can see the rubble in the wake of a lot of the attacks that were ongoing, the liberation of Europe. Allied soldiers pushed into France, went into Paris, ultimately liberating France. Soviet armies closing in on Germany from the east. The Allies are going to push from the west eastward. So it's almost like a vice that's kind of slowly but surely coming to a close on Germany. You can see here soldiers marching through coastal towns. Here, that's the center of Paris after the Allies go in and liberate Paris from German control. Soldiers taking a little time off from the battlefield to relax, have an adult beverage. You can see there, Happy Easter, Adolf. Easter eggs for Hitler. These are all bombs that they're writing on. The Battle of Berlin begins in April of 1945. Hitler committed suicide that month, as we had discussed previously in class. Mussolini had been killed by the partisans, and then his body was disgraced and dragged through the streets of Italy. So Hitler committed suicide and had his body destroyed so that his body would not be disgraced after his death. Germany surrenders in May 1945. You can see once again the leftover rubble in some of the city streets. Another photograph of destroyed buildings. So although Europe is much older than obviously the United States, some of its buildings are newer just because they had to rebuild from scratch much of Western Europe after World War II. The Battle of Midway, this is the turning point, as we had mentioned previously, turning point in the Pacific front. You can see where Midway is located. June 4th, 1942. Japan targeted Midway to get the United States naval fleet. United States attack on Japanese aircraft carriers was successful. We destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, and this was the turning point of the war in the Pacific. There he is. You know him, you love him. Commander David McCampbell from the United States Navy. He's a pilot. You can see the ships, the destroyer ships lined up one after the other. And we mentioned a lot of these battles were in very difficult conditions on hot, damp islands, including Guadalcanal. This is in August through February of 42 and 43. The Allies attacked the Japanese air base in the Solomon Islands. The battle turned into a savage struggle and it ended with more than 24,000 dead. Iwo Jima and Okinawa, two other islands. These are kind of the stepping stones towards mainland Japan. February to June of 45. Brutal fighting over each of these islands. Kamikaze pilots are being used, extreme casualties on both sides. There's the iconic flag being raised at Iwo Jima. And of course, we have two devastating atomic bombs that are going to be used on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You can see there what's left over, basically nothing after the atomic bomb is dropped. Two bombs, August 6th and 9th of 1945. President Truman informed an invasion of Japan might cost 1 million lives, so he decided to use the atomic bombs instead. Dropping the bomb would be the quickest possible end to the war. This kind of helped to sway Truman's opinion. Approximately 140,000 Japanese civilians died instantaneously with the two atomic bomb attacks. Others would die shortly thereafter from fallout. The second atomic bomb would finally get the Japanese, who were very stubborn and very prideful, to finally surrender. VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day. The United States had defeated Japan. World War II had come to a conclusion. And so too has our discussion on World War II. Hopefully you enjoyed this discussion. And until next time, Mr. Clarke is